Welcome to Thursdays Live with Chug. My name is Neha Mahajan. I'm the Business Development and Outreach Manager at Chug LLP Attorneys and CPAs. A very warm welcome to all of you who are joining us. We are live on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. So, why don't you comment and let us know where you're joining us, which city you're watching us from. That'll be great to know. Today we're going to be talking about Form I-9. This is the ubiquitous HR onboarding document, really, that is used to record employment eligibility verification. Well, that's required by federal government. And this form is slated to undergo a significant change on October 31st. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about, look back at some of the changes that came by during COVID, when the pandemic first hit us, and how this form changed for all of us, especially from an HR compliance perspective. Before I get into all these details, I want to introduce our partner and attorney, Gladys Gervacio, who's joining us from our LA office. Hi there, Gladys. Good morning.
Hi, Neha. Good morning. Thank you for the introduction. So I'm Gladys Gervacio. I'm a partner immigration attorney based out of our Los Angeles office. So as Neha mentioned, we'll be discussing updates to I-9. But before we dive into our topic, just a quick disclaimer. This session does not create an attorney-client relationship and does not constitute legal advice. So it's intended purely for general information purposes only. Now that's out of the way, Neha, I think we're ready to start.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the disclaimer, Gladys. I-9 form, it's used by all employers. Doesn't matter how big or small the company is. It's a federal requirement and all employers must use it. So if you're not using it, you should know that I-9 form is a must and can get you into trouble if you're not already using it. A lot of people are kind of wary of it because it scares them, but there's nothing scary about I-9 form if the procedure is followed. And that's exactly why we're going to talk about I-9s today. And as the world is opening up, people are coming back to office. Also, the entire COVID-19 changes that came to I-9 are also ending. So we're going to talk about all of that today. Gladys, the I-9 forms that we know of today, right now, right? What does an I-9 form look like and what's in the form?
So the I-9 form is the form used by employers, like you said, to verify the identity and employment authorization of individuals that they hire for employment here in the US. It consists of 3 sections. You have section 1, which is the employee information and attestation. And this is where the employee provides his personal information and attests to his eligibility to work in the US. So the employee has to complete this section no later than his first day of employment. And then we have the section 2. The section 2 is completed by the employer, and this is called the employer review and verification. And this is where the employer actually physically inspects the supporting documents presented by the employee. It could be a list A document. A list A document, for example, is US passport or your green card. So it establishes both your identity and your employment authorization. And then you have the combination of list B or list C document. List B referring to your identity documents, like your driver's license. And then a list C document would be a document that establishes your employment authorization, such as your social security card. So it's during the completion of the section 2 that the employer physically examines this document and checks whether it's reasonable presenting it. And the employer has to sign this section no later than the 3rd day of employment. And then you have the section 3, which is for re-verification and rehires, which the employer also completes as needed.
Okay, so you talked about section 2, and I guess that's where the HR or the authorized person from a company must physically examine the documents that's presented by an employee for authenticity, right? And I think that's where the change came by during COVID times. Am I right there, Gladys?
That's right, Neha. So during COVID, the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, implemented temporary policies that would provide relief to employers during this time. So one of the temporary policies was allowing employers to inspect the documents virtually. So it could be through a video conference or by email or by fax or similar means. So this is an exception to the rule of physically examining the document. But this temporary policy is ending soon. It's going to end on April 30. And I want to say that it's more of a temporary deferment rather than a complete waiver, because once the policy ends, the employer still has to physically examine the document when the employee resumes work, or again when the temporary policy ends.
Yeah, well, thank you for mentioning that, Gladys. Then there was another, second wave of changes that were implemented, right?
That's right. So another temporary policy was that employers were allowed to accept expired List B documents. So as I mentioned earlier, List B documents are your identity documents. This was in response to the difficulties encountered by individuals who happen to have expired, IDs and
Yeah.
could not or extend them during COVID because of government office closures or, limited operations. So during COVID, DHS allowed employers to accept expired List B documents. But again, this temporary policy is expected to end on April 30.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, when these policy changes were made, and the document verification was literally left to virtual verification. I don't know how HRs or compliance teams were managing all of that. It's not easy to check on a small screen whether a document is authentic or not, right?
That's that's true. That's true, Neha. That's one of the challenges faced by employers or the HR persons responsible for completing these I-9s.
Yeah. So now that all these changes are coming to an end and we are so um, kind of coming back to normalcy, and HR and compliance teams would again be required to check all these documents physically and in person, what should companies expect after April 30th?
Okay. So now that it's ending, these temporary policies are ending on April 30, we need to remind the employers that we're going to go back to the requirement of physical in-person inspection of the employees' documents. And for those who actually availed of this virtual or via email or via fax inspection of documents, when the employee resumes work in the office and or when this flexibility ends, which is ending on April 30, whichever is earlier, the employer is still required to inspect the physical documents of the employee and make updates to Form I-9. So there's a section where you need to make an annotation there and update Section 2 of Form I-9. Now, for those that presented expired List B documents, the second policy, you're not excused from presenting a valid document once this temporary policy is over. So employers will have to ask these employees to present a valid List B document. So does it have to be the same List B document that you provided initially? It doesn't have to be the same. Any valid List B or even List A document for that matter would suffice for the purpose. And of course, the employer would again have to update Section 2 of Form I-9.
Yeah, I just want to remind our audience who's joining us and watching us right now, we are live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So if you have any questions, I have our attorney and partner, Gladys Gervacio, joining us from our LA office. She's an immigration attorney, and we're talking about the I-9 forms and the compliance that, a lot of companies would have to come back to when it comes to I-9. So be sure to ask us your questions or send us your questions at info@chuk.com in case you're watching us in a recorded format. Gladys, I was just thinking when you were mentioning about all these policy changes being deferred for, starting April 30th, I'm thinking of all those companies who have gone into 100% remote and the employees are not physically returning into office anymore. So what are they going to do? Are they going to continue doing, checking everything online?
So Neha, once this temporary policy and the requirement is the employer has to physically examine this document. So we're going to go back to the pre-COVID
Yeah.
era of using, the current version of the form and presenting the documents and physically examining these documents in person. And
Okay.
as you mentioned in your introduction earlier, that the current version of the form is actually going to have another makeover. And so the
Yes.
current version expires on October 31st. And there are some expected changes to this version. One of which is sections 1 and 2 are going to be compressed into one page. They're going to make section 3 as a standalone supplement or a separate document that should be just attached if needed. They're going to simplify the instructions for it's easier for the employees and employer to understand and follow. They're going to remove certain items in list C documents and so on.
So the entire I-9 form actually goes into a makeover, and the new form will be available somewhere around October 31st, I would imagine.
That's right, Neha, because the current form is expected to expire on
Okay.
that date.
Okay, great, great. Now, we are going back into pre-COVID era. We are expecting a new change in the I-9 form. We are, the policy deferments that we have are ending on April 30th. The new form, the new I-9 form will come back, will come to us sometime October 31st. So this is a lot of information for those who are either in the HR teams or, I-9 compliance teams. That's something that you should be mindful of. I'm also thinking, you might be wondering, why does this form I-9 concern you? Especially a lot of you who do not hire foreign workers or do not have anything to do with immigration must be wondering, why does form I-9 concern you? So Gladys, I know you get this question all the time where there are these small business owners, that are confused. Why do they need an I-9? Does everybody need an I-9?
Oh, for sure, Neha. So if you are an employer in the US, this definitely concerns you. You mentioned startups, businesses, new employers starting to grow their business. You are going to employ individuals eventually, and these are individuals are going to help you grow your business. So even if you do not intend to hire foreign workers, you have to be I-9 compliant. You are required by law to complete Form I-9. So the bottom line is all US employers must correctly complete Form I-9 for every individual that they hire for employment in the US.
Okay, so be watchful because there can be penalties, and we'll dive into those. We'll make you guys aware of it. For those of you who are joining us right now and are wondering what we are talking about, we're talking about I-9 compliance, the forms, and the changes that are expected. And a lot of you are probably already familiar with an I-9 form. And those who are not, Gladys, I just want you to kind of recap. We are almost 15 minutes into our discussion right now. What is an I-9 form? And why is it important? Who takes care? Like who cares about the I-9 form?
So the I-9 is actually the employment eligibility verification form. So which, as the name suggests, it's the form used by employers to verify the identity and employment eligibility of individuals that they would hire for employment in the US. So I guess a bit of history. Congress enacted the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. And it was in response to the growing problem of people migrating to the US illegally and US employers hiring them. And so the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986 required employers to verify. So for the first time, employers were required under penalty of perjury to verify the employment authorization of the workers that they are hiring in the US. You know, they realize that the magnet that attracts people from all over the world to the US is jobs, the employment that US employers provide to these individuals.
Yeah, wow, thank you. I definitely did not know that little nugget of information. So thank you, Gladys. Thank you for, sharing that information with us. So definitely we know that I-9 compliance is needed so that employers can verify whether the documents that the employees are submitting are correct and are not are not fake. If I were for lack of a better word. And this is why I-9 compliance is so very necessary. It is also a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of cross-checking information, which I'm sure HR and compliance teams are used to. But that also means that mistakes can happen, right? And what are some of the common I-9 mistakes and how should the companies avoid them, Gladys? I would like you to share your expertise here.
Thank you, Neha. So there's a lot of things to track with the I-9, as you can tell, and the most common mistakes are, incomplete or improper information listed in the fields, or they're missing a signature, or it's not timely completed within the required period of time. Another common mistake is over documentation or under documentation. And another, I think this I should emphasize to employers is you can't require the employees to have them present specific documents. What you can do is just give them the list of list A, list B, list C documents, and it's up to the employee to provide which document to you. So you can't direct them or demand certain specific documents from the employee. Well, and believe it or not, another common mistake is missing I-9s, when it's required by ICE in an audit. So these mistakes can be avoided if you properly train your HR personnel or the persons responsible for completing and maintaining your I-9s. And that it would be in your best interest to do so because penalties can be steep. In fact, the government has collected millions of dollars in penalties from I-9 violators. So it would be in your best interest, of course, to be compliant.
Yeah, thanks, Gladys. Now that you mentioned about penalties, I'd really like to know, what does a penalty look like? You said government has collected millions of dollars just from I-9 non-compliance. Wow, that's a lot of money. So how can companies be assured that they're doing the right thing? And what kind of penalties are they looking at if they have not been able to?
So Neha, the penalties actually, the fines, DHS increased the fines effective October 2021 to account for inflation. So for paperwork violations, you have it ranges from $232 to or $34 to $2,300 something per individual. And so employers belatedly realize that small mistakes can add up to big fines. And of course, so those are just for paperwork violations, meaning, it wasn't properly completed, or you cannot produce it, or it wasn't timely completed and all that. But the fines for knowingly hiring, an unauthorized worker are, of course, more steep. So it ranges from, let me see my notes, it's $590 to $4,700 for the first offense. So
Wow.
then if the government finds that you're engaged in a repeated, violation or practice of violating a pattern or practice of violating the I-9 rules, you can be subject to criminal penalties as well. But I do want to mention that for the civil fines, the amounts are based on different factors. It could be based on the size of the business, size meaning revenue, the payroll, the number of employees. It could also be based on the seriousness of the violation, the employer's history of violations, if you have had previous violations. And most importantly, it's the good faith of the employer in trying to comply with I-9 rules. So if you're able to show that you're in good faith in complying with I-9 rules, you can actually avoid penalties. And this is where best practices come in.
Yeah, and that's where attorneys like you come into practice too, right, Gladys? That's where you help and guide companies on how to, not make mistakes. A simple training of the HR could really save companies hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, $230 to $4,700 per application per I-9 will quickly add up if you are a mid-sized business, right?
That's right. And so we do encourage, employers to observe best practices, one of which is, of course, as mentioned earlier, is to properly train your individuals who are responsible for maintaining and completing I-9s. And why is this so crucial? It's because there's so many things to keep track of. You want to see whether you're using the most current version of the form, the correct version. You want to make sure you're properly maintaining it and storing it. Is it regularly updated? Are the forms timely completed? And all these things. And another best practice that I actually encourage employers to do is to do an internal audit of your I-9 forms. It could be a self-check. You or your HR team can regularly check your I-9s every 6 to 12 months. Or it can be an independent audit, performed by a third party like our firm, our Chug LLP. We do this for our clients. This is because even the audit itself, the internal audit itself, has to follow certain guidelines. It can't be done in a discriminatory or retaliatory manner. And then you have to define the scope and purpose of the audit and then communicate this to your employees so that your employees will know, what to expect. And
Right.
lastly, I think it would be good for employers to have a written I-9 policy in place, and our firm can also assist you with this. So the reason I say having a written policy is important is because one of the items that the ICE officer would require in his subpoena when he serves it on you is a copy of your written I-9 policy. So you want to be ready with this document when you do get audited.
Right. So, a good practice would be to really audit your I-9s or hire a firm such as ours to audit it for you, because if you won't do it or if you won't hire a third party to do it, ICE would come and do it. And when they do it, it's not going to be a bed of roses. Am I right, Gladys?
That's right, Neha.
So when does an ICE audit happen, really? How does ICE find out that a company is non-compliant with I-9s? And when ICE does conduct an audit, what should a company expect?
Right. So the government agency that's tasked to enforce I-9, this form, employment verification, is the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. So it's ICE. The ICE audit can be targeted or it can be random. So an interesting bit of information is that most of the ICE audits are lead driven, meaning they're based on tips of informants, and these can be your disgruntled employees, right? So ICE has a hotline where employees or any person can actually call and report violators. So, but no matter the cause or the reason for the I-9 audit, the ICE audit, um, you do not want to be caught unprepared. And that's why you want to follow the best practices that we discussed, and then be ensure to be I-9 compliant all the time. Now, to answer the second part of your question, like what happens during an ICE audit. So what happens is the ICE serves a notice of inspection on you, on the employer, and you have 3 business days. You just have 3 business days to produce all these I-9s. And based on our experience, they're quite strict with this time period. They rarely give you an extension to provide to produce the I-9s. So that's why it's important that you are ready with your I-9s. So you just have 3 business days to do that. You submit everything. Together with the notice of inspection, they also, include a subpoena that requests, supporting documents such as your business license, your company documents, your payroll. This section, this in our experience, they've allowed extensions in producing these documents, but for the actual I-9s, no, they're quite strict with that. So they review the I-9s and then make a finding, make their initial finding. If they're correctable, you have 10 days to correct any mistakes that you have. If not, then eventually they will issue a notice of intent to fine, and it's up to you. They'll make their findings impose the fines if needed, and then that's it. You either agree, you pay, or you question it later on.
Wow.
So
And all of this can be so easily avoided. All of this can be so easily avoided with either training your HR or, an I-9 compliance team with how to actually verify all the documents and how to make sure the form is completed on time and in the right manner. And if you cannot do it, hire a firm such as ours who can help you and guide you on not only creating policies around it, but also audit them for you and make sure that you are I-9 compliant, because if there's an audit issued by ICE, it can get really murky very soon, not just in terms of fines and penalties and all the stress, but also it's going to impact the goodwill of your company, which is not something that you want. Gladys, can you believe we've been talking for the last 28 minutes? We literally have 2 minutes left. And I just want you to, kind of repeat or give some pointers towards best practices when it comes to I-9, especially in today's time when, there's so much changes that have happened recently with I-9 because of the pandemic, right? And now some of those changes are ending, and some of those changes are going to be implemented, such as the new I-9 form, right, which we are expecting around October 31st. So if you could just, recap these changes for me really quickly, that would be really amazing.
So thank you, Neha. Just a reminder to our employers out there that, the temporary policies are going to end April 30, and we're going to go back to pre-COVID era. You have to require valid List B documents. You have to inspect them in person, the documents that the employees present. And of course, this form is often overlooked, right? But I can't overemphasize the importance of ensuring that your HR personnel are properly trained, that you regularly conduct, internal audits of your I-9s, and that you have a written I-9 policy in place. So
All right. That's nice of you to kind of put it down all together for us, Gladys. Sadly, we're at the end of our discussion today. To all of you, thank you for joining us. I see some comments on social media saying that you couldn't hear us. I apologize for that. I hope you were able to hear us, at least to some degree. If not, my apologies. Sometimes these technical issues happen. It impacts the best of us. But thank you for joining us today. And if you have any questions for us, info@chug.com. Please send it to us. We'll be happy to set up a consult or go over whatever questions you have. Gladys and I are here to help. And if you have any suggestions in terms of what kind of topics you would like us to talk about, especially if you're a company and you want us to help you, we'd be happy to, go over some of the topics that you want us to talk about on Thursdays Live. Shoot an email to me, info@chug.com, and I'll be glad and happy to bring that topic with one of our experts, whether a CPA or an attorney, and guide you through. Until next week, I will see you again at 11 a.m. PST to 11 a.m. PST and 2 p.m. Eastern Time. See you next week. Thank you.